Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets fall on the road at the hands of Jimmy Butler and the Miami Heat. We break down how the superstar took over in the third quarter, some of the key sequences that lost this game late, and ultimately, though, why there is still some silver lining vibes.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there is Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. And Doug, in a game 122-115 where the Nets lost to the Miami Heat, a prime example early in the season where sometimes a superstar just takes over.
Yeah, they just had really no answer for Jimmy Butler. To some degree, Duncan Robinson had been on a bio, but Jimmy just absolutely took this game over for stretches where it looked like the Nets really had no chance at all of ever stopping them. I mean, we could talk about strategically where they probably went wrong in a few different places, but Jimmy was fully in his bag tonight. And when he gets like this sort of like playoff Jimmy Butler, and this has got to be one of his, I haven't looked at his full game line. I know that he's not had peak games like this. I'm be shocked if this wasn't his best game of the year.
Let me go ahead and fill that line for you real quick, Dougster. 35 minutes, 12 and 19, 10 of 11 from the free throw line for 36 points with 3 blocks to go along with 5 rebounds and 3 assists. Continue.
Yeah, they tried to kind of push him outside a little bit to start, like sort of allowing the threes, not wanting to get him in the paint. But like the individual defensive matchups they had going with him were pretty brutal. Royce got absolutely cooked for multiple stretches in this game where they never brought any help. But regardless, really not regardless, but that ends up being kind of the story. I hate that there's other things obviously at play in this game. We'll get into all of it, but Jimmy Butler this was one of those games where it's like, I'm the best guy on the court. I'm going to let you know about it. You're going to have unless you make a significant adjustment to try to stop me, which is going to come at the deficit of just like not guarding some other guys, they're going to be in real trouble. And that was really basically, for the third quarter and a little bit plus the story of sort of why the Nets lost. A couple other along the margin things, but Butler was just so much tonight.
Yeah, half of his 36 points came in the third quarter alone, right? So big surge there. The Nets overall gave up back-to-back 30-point quarters to start this game in the first half as well. But Jimmy Butler, man, he doesn't take a ton of threes, but early in this season, he only averages for his career 2.5. And in the last few seasons in Miami, last 5 seasons, no more than typically 2. He's knocking down 50% though. So it's like when he's taking them, he is making them, and he actually threw the volume up a little bit more in this one, knocked out a couple from the outside as well. It's one of those games where, and you mentioned as well, Duncan Robinson knocked down some wide open triples. You expect that to happen. Bam Adebayo was a real problem. But there are just games like this, right? Sometimes when you run into a player like Jimmy Butler, who's going to put on one of these, there's just a world where you're not going to be able to go toe-to-toe or possession for possession. There's other factors that came into this that we'll get into. But it's okay to come in a game like this and just tip your hat and go, okay, 7 in a row for Miami Heat. They're playing good basketball. They didn't have Tyler Hero. The perimeter shooting was there, and Jimmy Butler led the way. Like, it stinks, but we need not make excuses for why sometimes the other team has really good players that play really well.
I think also that he came into this game with like sort of something to prove. I mean, there was multiple mentions of like having lost to them already earlier in the season. There was clearly a chippiness to this game that was going almost throughout, like where the histrionics around specifically some like Heat dunks, which I would do too. I mean, like they threw it down a few times. Clearly Claxton and Bam were getting into it. Jimmy and DSJ got into it where DSJ was just like begging for a tech. So I don't know like what was happening that was called. If it was just general frustration or if there was just like a lot of talking in this game, which I would not be shocked about because the game clearly had a vibe of the Heat like wanted to needle and push and they were pumped up in a way that was like it came through in the way they were playing. Like they wanted to really, really beat the Nets. I'm not exactly sure what that stems from, or if it's anything more than just they lost last time and they just wanted to put a new stamp on the season. But did you get that sense? I got that sense from like for sure from Bam. Jimmy just seemed like he was playing downhill in a way we definitely didn't play like this the first game. and really hadn't been playing like this a ton during the rest of the season. And they just kind of took it to a next level that I'm wondering if they just kind of got themselves geared up for this game for one reason or the other.
Yeah, I mean, Heat are now 8-4 on the season, and they are on a 7-game winning streak. So you can do the hard math. They were 1-4 to start the year. We talked about when we came into this season, teams that have playoff aspirations versus regular season. Sometimes you need to manufacture ways to get yourself psyched up, right? So whether it's the winning streak, whether it is having lost to this team, which and we know, we talked about it that way. When the Nets beat Miami, it was, hey, watch yourself. We didn't have Nicholas Claxton, didn't have Cameron Johnson. We're going toe-to-toe with a team that has real playoff pedigree to them. So I think sometimes it's all right, not all right. Sometimes it's expected that a team like Miami looks across the court and says, well, we're better than them. We've proven so much more than them. And now we're going to go. And I think an intention to try to embarrass a team when you talk about the dunks and some of those plays, I think the Nets still held up their end of the bargain here and made it a competitive game. But it had that vibe to it for sure, which I always find fascinating, right? A random Thursday night in November, all of a sudden gets a little bit more energy to it.
I'm all for it, by the way. It makes the game way more exciting. And clearly, like I said, there was some, I don't know if there was bulletin board material, like locker room material going on here. But Butler, if you just look at his line, 19 field goal attempts most of the season, 5 3-point attempts most of the season, free throw attempts second most of the season, right? These are all just blocks most of the season with 3. Like there was just numbers that he was putting up that he just simply had not been putting up until now. Clearly we've seen it from him in the past, so it's not like the performance comes out of nowhere. But we've also seen a Heat team that at times will sort of do one thing for the regular season. And there's a reason he's called Playoff Jimmy. You know what I mean? Like this guy's got gears that he can get up to that are kind of astounding, honestly, at times. It doesn't always have to go there, but something, I guess, was pressing them, whether it was just schematically, like the Nets weren't throwing enough help at him. And he was like, you just can't put Royce O'Neal on me. Like, that's not going to work. That's probably desperately could have used Ben Simmons tonight for this, for this exact matchup that they just didn't have. Right. And so they just didn't have the bodies to throw at him, or he felt like it was, a slight to throw some of these guys out, whatever it was. He just look at the box score. His numbers were the most that he's put up of anything this whole season, through whatever 11 games.
And obviously, we're going to turn our attention over to the Nets side in some of these plays. But the last note that I'll make here around Jimmy Butler and the Miami Heat, guess what? This game against Brooklyn kicks off. They're going to have a home and home against Chicago, followed by Cleveland, followed by the Knicks, and followed by the road trip to the Brooklyn Nets on November 25th. This is the start now after this last home game of a road trip for them. And all those teams that they're going to come up against are all the teams that are around, that are in that pecking order of the Eastern Conference, that, we can shuffle up, we can be a 5 seed, we can overtake you, right? So I think that it's very likely that you come into this run and go, hey, let's start the trend here where we knock down a handful of these guys. Coming up here in a second, though, let's talk about some of these late game sequences. How close was this game from being much closer in the fourth quarter? Maybe the Nets just ran out of a little bit of steam. We'll hit those key moments coming up next.
All right, this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Look, this time of year can be tough. It's the end of the year. We're changing the seasons. Maybe you're not looking forward to the holidays. You are, but you're struggling with how to feel about it. Maybe you got the seasonal blues. We've kind of all been there at times. This time of year can be a lot. It's natural to feel some sadness or anxiety about it. Adding something new and positive to your life can counteract some of those feelings. Therapy can be a bright spot amid all the stress and change, something to look forward to, make you feel grounded, give you the tools to manage everything that's going on. And look, there's a lot this time of year. There is a lot going on. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient. It's flexible. It's suited to your schedule. Just got to fill out a brief questionnaire, get matched with a licensed therapist, switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Find your bright spot this season with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA.
And also, got to let you know about our title sponsor, Game Time. That's because, as we told you before, you want to get yourself some tickets. You don't want to have to deal with the hassle of where is it going to be? What is my view going to look like? Am I going to get the best possible deal? Last minute tickets, flash deals, zone deals, easy to find and buy tickets on every kind of event in your area. Guess what? Brooklyn Nets lost. Maybe you want to go head over and see a little Chris Tucker doing a little bit of comedy over at the Beacon Theater. You can get there right here in the middle of November. Enjoy yourself by knowing that when you go over to the Game Time app, it's the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. As I said, see your view from your seat so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. All-in prices show you the total up front, so you know you're getting a great deal without the hidden fees. Buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. And what we were guaranteed to have here, Doug, if I may, is a moment where after we acknowledge that Jimmy Butler is incredible and we'll talk about how good Bam Adebayo was in the matchup on the interior, but there was no doubt that at some point I was going to tell you, listen, the Nets lost. But it's another example this season where they are a hard team to just put down. By the way, in the fourth quarter, when they were down by 13, down by 16, down by 17 at one point, I sunk back in my seat a little bit and got a little sad. And then there were these couple of moments, a couple of nice triples, a few buckets, and really a handful of sequences where it's like, man, if not for a couple turnovers and maybe knocking down an extra 3, this could have been a 2-possession game late, which is saying a lot, given that I don't think the Nets deserved necessarily to be in it based on some of the stat lines that we look at in the box score. He's going to hop himself off mute and dive in.
Had to keep myself quieter there. I had so many thoughts. It was just they were just going to come pouring over the microphone if I left it unmuted. Sometimes I have to hold myself back from all the announcements. No, there was about 6.5 minutes left in the game. And it's like, that's sometimes when I'll check into like the box, just watching, taking notes, and they're like, let's check in the box score. Plus, they were just like getting kind of trounced at that point. And I'm like, okay, like where are like the key places
for a little bit?
Well, just like look, I've said this a million times. I'll say it one more time. Just I don't like to look at the box score during the game because I try not to let that sort of affect. Well, I'll be able to look at all that later.
Yes,
right. Like that will all be available to see when the game is over. Like the stats will all be there. But anyway, they're getting killed. I'm like, oh, let's see where the key deficiencies are. Really, at that point, 6.5, 7 minutes, something like that. Everything was basically equal. Like shot attempts, pretty much equal. 3-point attempts, equal. Turnovers, equal. Within like 1 or 2. Rebounds, equal. Like I was like, hold it. How is this even? How are they losing by like they're down like 15 at the time? I'm like, how is this even the case? The story at that point was that the Heat had just hit 50% of their threes. The Nets had hit 40. It dropped for both teams from that point on, and the Heat had basically like shot like 96% from the foul line, and the Nets were like 70%. That was the whole story. But if you back those two numbers out and actually just take the Heat off from like this flamethrower status, which is where they were, a lot of clean looks, whatever, you like but if you back those out, it was like a 5-point game or something like that. And I'm like, oh, and then at that point, the Heat started missing everything.
Yes.
and
they cooled off.
And they missed everything. And then then that's really had a chance. They really had a chance for about a 3.5 to 4 minute stretch to get themselves back into the game. And they just couldn't take advantage. They just couldn't hit any shots during that stretch. And I'm with you. Like this game was closer than you would think. And that doesn't really count for much when it's an L in the loss column.
And it's funny, too, because you mentioned that free throw stat. We were talking before we started. We were both thinking about this thing. Nothing changed, by the way, in that category. At the time that we had this thought, around that 6-minute mark in the fourth quarter, 23 of 24, 96% for the Miami Heat. The Nets, 21 of 27, 78%. I did the math on it. Just match the 96% at the line. It's 5 more points for Brooklyn. And at that point, it would have shrunk it from being an 11-point game down to a 5-point game, a 2-possession battle. Now, there's a reality to how the Nets are constructed and who's taking free throws for them, and knowing the percentages aren't always going to get there. But to your point, so many of these stats just seem like they were even money. I would make a very strong case here, as I think it's worth breaking down some of these other things that happened. You mentioned Ben Simmons would be tailor-made for a matchup like this. Boy, I tell you, when Cameron Johnson picks up the early fouls, to only look at the box score, you'd say, well, 27 minutes isn't necessarily as much as you want for him, but 5 of 10 and 3 of 6 and got to the line 3 times, had the rebounds, the assists, 16 points, plus 18. Plus 18, the only guy that clearly won his minutes by a large margin on the court tonight. And those fouls were just brutal. In a world, Doug, where Kevin Love The Kevin, in quotes, the tortoise Love, who just lumbered over outside the restricted area multiple times against Cameron Johnson and sent him to the bench early. Like, that is a huge tale of this game, because you needed the firepower and the versatility of Cameron Johnson on the floor.
And they just have, I mean, they do have two guys that are great at this, right? Like Love is great at that, and Lowry's great at it too. And they just draw tons of fouls. It's not a mistake. It's not luck. They've been doing this. Kevin Love has not made his career off this, but I think he, like, every year, like, leads the league.
His later career off of this.
I'm pretty sure he leads the league in drawn offensive fouls, or at an astoundingly low minute number too, right? Like, it's just what he does. He's really good at anticipating it. So you can't. It's part of their strategy. But I'm with you, man. Like, Cam Johnson, he was playing well tonight. He was shooting really well. They definitely needed, like, his ability to just kind of space the floor. And to lose those minutes does suck. And we sometimes talk about, if you play these games out, 100 times, how often does it go the other way? I think this game, with the stats that they had and, like, sort of what we saw, Heat win more than 50%, I think, for sure. But it's not like a 75-25 thing. Like, this game feels more even, with a few things like the Cam Johnson fouls, like that stretch in the fourth quarter, like this not shooting, 99% from the free throw line or whatever. Like, there's just little worlds where it's a little closer. And sometimes, like, too, just to remember, those little edges that happen mid game or in the fourth quarter do affect sometimes, like, the final 3 minutes, right? Yes. Where it's like, oh, now we're down, because being down 9 or being down 3 in those five it's just a totally different vibe. And so, like, they kind of had lost it already before the game was over, but they lost it in a way where the ball bounces a few different ways, and it's like in the last 3 minutes just does have a totally different vibe. And I'm with you, man. The CJ fouls were just they suck. They weren't wrong, but it's just like you absolutely hate to see it.
Only thing more brutal than the fouls is them being the right calls, right? Like, you could almost say, totally. Well, geez, that's Bush League, or that's a borderline, when you're just like, well, that was about as obvious as a charge as you could possibly. And by the way, Cameron Johnson doesn't have this electric speed to him either. So I'll just reiterate, when those two guys meet outside the restricted area, it looked like Cameron Johnson was slow motion going up into his layup and intertwining like the medical snake symbol at the hospital. Like, it was just the weirdest thing. We always talk about, guys that give you non-athlete vibes. There were a couple of tight moments there where I thought, okay, Doug and I could reenact that very easily. That being the case, though, the other thing here, I do want to get to the fatigue factor coming up on the back end of this. Not about losing this game, but just about what this team is going through now with a consistent, someone's going to miss time, someone's going to have an injury. I did think about, and when the Nets shoot under 40% from three, I keep coming back to that 3-point shooting thing that we've talked about so often, and I almost always do end up agreeing with you about it. But the Spencer Dinwiddie chucks tonight, we're in the category of, hey, man, it's okay if you just take that extra dribble and try to find something else. Now, to the credit of the Miami Heat and their defense, this is kind of what they force you into at times, where you feel like you are running out of options. There were half a dozen, if not more, possessions. That's probably lowballing significantly, where somebody had their ball in their hands and all the vibes were, I don't know, I guess I'm going to try to do something. And, you saw Dorian Finney-Smith ran into this oftentimes. You saw exchanges between Cameron Johnson and Mikal Bridges where it was like, we're handing it off, but really what we're doing is fumbling this thing out of bounds. That, I think, is also a cumulative impact that you talk about over 3+ quarters, where by the time you get to the fourth, you forget about all the wear and tear you went through to maybe have a chance to get back in it.
Yeah, like, they're really connected defense. They do a lot of the little things correct. You find yourself, like you said, running out of room and running out of shot clock quicker than you think that you're going to, like, when it all is said and done. And those are, like, ends up becoming, just those kind of hero shots at the end. And there, and by the way, during that final stretch too, was the Heat. It wasn't just the Nets missing shots. The Heat were just generating turnovers. Like, they were making it really, really difficult to get shots at the rim. Things were just really contested in a way that's just going to always make the shots tougher. Like, in reality, the Heat had a lot cleaner looks in this game than the Nets too, which I didn't factor in when you're just looking at the stats. Like, if you're watching the game, what the stats won't tell you is, and this is what, the eye test can rule here, is that the Heat looks were considerably cleaner.
Yes,
shooting 50% is still at that one point is still at the high end of expectation. but it wasn't like they weren't shooting just Hail Mary threes. I mean, they were a lot of just real clean. All right, we got a few more things to talk about as we close out the show. Remember, with YouTube Live, which we're in now, we will stay afterwards, answer some questions, a whole bunch of good stuff for everyone that's in there. Now we'll talk about that we're getting into the rest of that in a second. First, got to tell you about our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made so very easy. Prize Picks took all the fun stuff in fantasy and just removed some of the difficult stuff. So basically all you're doing at Prize Picks is you're going more or less on the Prize Picks projections. With basketball, points, assists, rebounds, blocks, steals; with football, touchdowns, rushing yards, literally everything. I mean, I could be here all day if I tried to list all the different Prize Picks projections. All you're doing is more or less on those Prize Picks projections. You're combining different picks together up to 5. You can win up to 25 times your money. You can combine sports. So maybe you like more on a Mikal Bridges scoring number, and then you like something that's, you take the Zach Wilson less, right? Let's just go Zach Wilson less, or anyone on the Giants less. And then we'll just feel pretty good about it over on a Prize Pick. And they also are doing injury reboot policies. No one else has even considered doing this right now. If you have a player who exits the game in the first half, doesn't return in the second, that player's rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with injury insurance. You have to get in the action right now. You go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Let me give it to you again. prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks is daily fantasy sports made easy.
All right, so as we tie a bow on the Brooklyn Nets loss here, dropping themselves to 500, but darn it, showing a heck of a lot of heart. I want to talk about Nicholas Claxton, but also remind you guys that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories and all throughout the day, obviously with local experts. And of course, the Locked On Plus, our national shows, are giving you every single league, not just NBA, NFL, hockey. You're going to talk NHL. You're going to talk college for all that, to let you know. I'll get into this here. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national 24/7 streaming channel. Doug, when you're trying,
just excited, buddy. You're excited. You're excited. It's
honestly,
okay.
Honestly, when I tell you that I want to talk about Nicholas Claxton, what I mean is I want to talk about Nicholas Claxton. You can't put this kind of thing in front of me. If it's on the monitor, I'm likely to read it. Now, Nicholas Claxton, I think, you mentioned at the top here, and we're not going to make this about Ben Simmons, but when you think about the different versions of this team, and we will get to Lonnie Walker here as well, the Nicholas Claxton, 26 minutes, 7 of 7, heck of a lot of lobs in this one as well. Even going 2 of 4 at the line is important for a player like him who's going to get there throughout the season. The rebounds weren't significant in this game. It was a very tough matchup, still comes away with the 3 blocks and gives you 16 points. Man, I had this energy earlier in the day today, and I'm just going to double and triple down on it. The idea that you don't want Nicholas Claxton to be a part of this team, and I don't mean you, anyone thinking they don't want to be a part of this team. He just matters too much. I know it's a losing effort. Take Nicholas Claxton off this court and put Ben Simmons in. The difference of impact is going to be seen thoroughly, and even on the defensive end. But you're just not going to get the same willingness to go in against a guy in Bam Adebayo who's got 20-plus pounds on you and lose those battles more often than not. It wasn't a perfect performance from Nicholas Claxton, but I refuse to go negatively on where this player should be in the hierarchy of the Brooklyn Nets value.
He was awesome. He was great tonight. It's not that. It's a really tough matchup against Bam. We already know he's a great switch defender. None of the Jimmy stuff is like his fault. They probably should have helped a little bit more on Jimmy, but it's really hard to help with him on Claxton because then Bam's going to kill you on the roll and then you're just dead, right? So it's like they put you in the right kind of thing. They put you in a bad spot. I'm not advocating trading Nick Claxton.
No.
It's mostly, where his name comes up is like how with anything ever and life and basketball for sure. It's like, well, what's the years and money attached to it, right?
Yeah,
Whether it's your house, your car, like, whatever, your kid's college, whatever it is. It's like, well, I'll vote to take it. I'm just going to need to see the price tag on it first, right? Like before I just snap call is going to happen. I think this is just my only question with Claxton. It's like, he is really great at the things he does. I just sometimes wonder if the Nets are at the right part of the timeline to pay him all the money he deserves, which he does. He deserves all the money. He deserves a huge contract. He's awesome. No doubt about it. He could be a swing guy on a championship team if he's like a defensive anchor and they have the right pieces in front of him.
Yep.
It's not that. It's just like you want to give him $25 million a year for basically no offense center. Like, that's tough when you're not a great team. Right. So that's the only thing. But like, for his performance tonight, I probably wish he played a little bit more. I know they can't really close with him when they're down because you got to just kind of be hitting threes and trying to get to the rim. And he's just not going to, at that point, the defense is sort of negligible. No, look, Claxton, I love the energy. I love that he challenges Bam, and Bam put one on him for sure during the thing. But they got super chippy. He's a great guy to watch, and he's one of the best switch defenders and just frankly defensive centers in the whole league. And that can be separate from, is he like too good and too expensive for the Nets timeline, which is really actually the question I think that I probably posed.
Of course. And listen, at 24 years old, he's just about to scratch the front end of his prime over the next 3 seasons. I'm willing to probably take that journey with him. And listen, subject to change, but it's hard to look at games like these and just him overall as a talent and everything the Nets have invested in him and how he's grown right over the years and not still want to see that next level for him. And that's a inside outside this game. The other inside outside this game, Doug, is you talked about early in the season during Finney-Smith, man, the stock's never going to be higher. Take a trade offer on him right now. Royce O'Neal, maybe going the other way at times, especially when the shot isn't falling from the outside and he's being given a insanely difficult matchup with, as you mentioned, with Jimmy Butler. I mean, what do you want him to do here? But the other guy is Lonnie Walker. I mean, you want to talk about steal of the century. If not for him, the Nets would have had a real losing margin, 31 bench points for the Miami Heat. You take away the 23 from Lonnie Walker, and you're staring down the barrel of 16 points from the other 4 players who all had difficult shooting performances to varying degrees. 9 of 18 from the field, only 2 of 7 from beyond the arc, but he did a little bit of everything, the burst, the transition game. Fascinating to see what happens with Lonnie Walker going forward here, because he may end up being the most valuable, non-core asset that the Nets are going to have on this roster if he keeps putting together performances like this.
I mean, he made up all the lack of production they didn't get from Dinwiddie, basically. He was like shot out of a cannon. I was actually worried a little bit at the beginning because they changed his rotation a little. Like, they usually bring him in at like the 7-minute mark or 6-minute mark, and they didn't. Like, they actually brought Trendon Watford in first, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. Actually, at that point, I thought maybe that his knee had acted up and he was maybe hurt, right? That was, obviously wrong because of what he did after that. So I was a little worried after the rotational change, but after that, like he was awesome. And one thing that I find pretty funny right now is that over at our friends on FanDuel, this is crazy. And I looked at this earlier and I was wondering maybe they had changed it. 6th Man of the Year award. Like, he's not even on the list. That's other guys on the 6th Man of the Year list award. I'm going to go past the obvious
back alley booking for these type of numbers.
Like IQ and CP3. Cam Thomas is plus 1,100, even though he's basically starts now. Or, come on, FanDuel. We got to pick up the pace here. Like, other guys on this list: Precious Achua, Dante DiVincenzo, TJ McConnell doesn't even play. Plus 42,000.
I'm taking Lonnie Walker.
Like,
I'm taking Lonnie Walker over those guys, just to let you know.
He's got to be. This is all to say. Like, it's egregious that he's not on the 6th Man of the Year list right now. It's to not even be listed. I mean, this guy's been arguably like the 4th best net or something like that. By point differential, he's like the 2nd best net. I can't really go fully off that. But 15 points a game in just 20 minutes. Like, he's been, 15. Yeah, a little bit more. He's been awesome. He's kind of been a savior in some ways because their bench has been a big reason that they've just kind of taken it to some other teams and kept themselves in games. And I can't say enough about him.
Yeah, 43%, excuse me, from beyond the arc in the month of November, just doing it with consistency and showing that he can be a guy that can take over the offensive end of the floor here for a little bit. So again, reminding everybody, we are talking about a game the Brooklyn Nets lost, and they're 6-6 now, playing at 500, won't see the court again until Sunday, which I'll make another little footnote here that I think that matters because, man, there's no excuses to be made here. But when I watch Mikal Bridges, it seems like this guy, and he had a knee knock in this one too, and he fought through it. I said it to you before we started. If this was a back-to-back, you might see the first regular season game that Mikal Bridges gets sat down for, because I don't know. Yeah, there's a physical fatigue. I'm going to give a little bit of mental fatigue here as well. He had, again, another series of fumbles in this game. The handle doesn't seem to be there. He's a better ball handler than what we've seen early in the season. So it just feels like if anyone who has not missed a game due to injury so far this season needs to, quote unquote, it's Mikal. Like, he just needs a breath away from this, because the numbers tell you one thing, but the eye test is telling you something different about where he is through these first 12 games.
I'm very much, and we'll get out of here on this. I'm very much team play all the games, because
100%.
Look, you just should play all the games. There is a point of diminishing returns where it's like, you can sit a couple here. Like, I know he's on a Cal Ripken like streak, and you're really hard pressed to break these things for no reason, because it's just rare to get them. And so it's a weird spot, right? Because it's like, you got a consecutive game played streak. They obviously went out of their way last year they did sit him down for one game, but they had him kind of walk onto the court and then leave. So they're definitely aware of this stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm with you. Like, we talked about it last episode. He's played the second most minutes in the NBA over the last 4 years, behind Jason Tatum. And he's like, and I looked, and we did a little digging on it. It's 1,000 more than like the next closest guy. And most guys are thousands of minutes less. And it's just, at some point it catches, and that doesn't count the FIBA stuff. Like, it just, some points it catches up with you. And if you need to just rest for a game or two, it's like, just okay. You played, you proved it. It's good. You played all the games. Great. Like,
right. You are the Cal Ripken of our generation. Great.
This is it's also a marathon and not a sprint.
Yep.
So if you need to rest, you need to rest. Anyway, I want to play. I want him to play every game, but at the same time, it's like, you can sit down, buddy. You've done enough. Okay, we are gonna get out of here. Tough loss. We're gonna stay around in YouTube live as always. If you have some questions, I'll even field the Harry Giles question, because I'm in a good mood as we close out of here. I'm just kidding. I'm not gonna do any Harry Giles questions. Make sure that you join subtext.com/LockedOnNets. Chop it up with us over there. Texting just all day long about the Brooklyn Nets. Join subtext.com/LockedOnNets.
It isn't the mountains ahead to climb that wear you out. It's the pebbles in your shoes. That is Mo Ali.
Oh, the all-time great poets. Float like a butterfly and sting like something that stings you. We'll be back again tomorrow and in a second on YouTube talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball, Bumblebee, basketball, yeah. Oh, it's the podcast where, as Doug told you, you put at Locked On Nets, you say you got a question, you don't mention Harry. I almost said Harry Styles. Don't mention Harry Styles either, by the way. Don't bring up Harry Giles and don't bring up Harry Styles for different reasons, but we don't want to hear about either one of them. And I'll even take a moment. I don't know what happened, Doug. I want people to know about Locked On and the national sports coverage in 24/7, but I think a bee may have stung me inside of my mouth for about 15 seconds. Anyway, how's everybody doing? Thanks for being in on the live, even following a loss.
I'm going to star some questions here, because there's some good ones from some new folks too, which is great. And we got some not old, but we got some frequent flyers, and we've got some other ones. I'll bring a couple of these up. You can star a couple more.
Yeah.
I like this question, because a lot of times from Mira Slayer, a lot of times you see in chats like, he didn't make any adjustments. Now, no one ever provides that adjustment. They just say, he didn't make any adjustments. It's the laziest thing. I get why people do it, but it's like, and this is why you'll never hear us say it. If we couldn't think of anything at the top, if we couldn't think of anything in our own analysis, we're hard pressed to call Vaughn on it. And I always just don't like when people say, he didn't make adjustments. And by the way, a timeout's not an adjustment. So those don't count.
Was I forgetting Sarah Marshall? Well, now you're just doing nothing. You got to do more than that.
I will say one thing I would have done differently in this game is when you see where Jimmy Butler, when you see what Butler is doing, and you see that the one-on-one matchups simply aren't working, and that he is dead set on doing this, which he was. Like, you could already tell the usage was through the roof in ways that I hadn't seen if you've been watching any tape on him. And he was just playing differently than he's played this season, not in the past. Then at that point, you just have to bring another help defender and just live with the threes. And I know that's why they don't want to do it. They don't want to do it because it means Lonnie Walker and Kevin Love and Caleb Martin are just, and Jaime Jaquez are just going to get open looks. And this is the trouble with doing this, right? Or it's going to be like Bam is going to roll free to the rim or whatever. At some point, you probably just need to say, we need to bring an extra defender onto Jimmy. Royce is not cutting it. Like, and DFS by himself is not cutting it. And it's either a foul or it's an easy bucket. And I think that you probably just need to live with it. And now that probably also means you lose by 25, right? Because they're going to have like a bunch of threes. But it's rough one to just watch him kill you kind of over and over again.
Yeah, I agree. I agree on that. I agree on that one as well, because at some point you know that you're getting beat by this specific method, so do something different. And then when if wide open threes go down, that's going to feel bad in a different way. But
Sure.
that's sometimes that's a part of it, right? You got to take your lump somewhere. Let's just punch me in 6 different ways. Don't keep hitting me in the same spot over and over again, right? The other thing that I would say too is I'll tie this into, we talked about in the episode, Royce O'Neal struggling. The 20 minutes were bad. The assignment was difficult. The trend in Watford 10 minutes, I can be comfortable giving him more, because you don't have a ton of size. You don't have Ben Simmons. Now, Trendon Watford does not have a history of being a lockdown defender, but I'll say it from both sides of it, even offensively and the ball handling. Like, I just would have taken that trade-off at some point when you're seeing how hard it is for Royce to take on that matchup. Hey, if I can go Trendon Watford for 15 in this game, and maybe he catches a little bit of energy on the offensive end and can go at the basket a little bit more readily than a Royce O'Neal is going to be able to, I wouldn't have hated switching up that dynamic a little bit as well. So I'm fine to say, again, we talk about this all the time. When the Nets win the game, there's not a ton to question about the decision that Coach Vaughn made. In this particular one, I wouldn't have hated seeing something different from a schematic standpoint and even from a personnel.
And you can also vary it too. It need not be every time. It can be flash help and then, and then flash off, right? Like, it can be
Flash on, flash off.
They don't really scram switch much, but like it can be, depending on what the matchup is, like you just bring a guy or don't, or like ghost it a little bit. Not like you can vary a little bit. It was just a little too much like, hey, this is happening kind of every time. And at that point, that is probably a lack of an adjustment. So
and
yeah,
I'll give the little extra knock on Vaughn here, just coming in, knowing that you don't have Ben Simmons. There's nobody on the roster that can really pick up that assignment one-on-one. Now, again, I'll even say, short of Cameron Johnson, who when he picks up all the fouls, you don't get that switchability to have him take some of those possessions too. So there's probably some things that impacted the way he wanted to go about it. This is
one here.
what do you got there?
Sorry, did you have one?
No, go ahead. I think I started this one, so yeah, ask it.
When can we admit that Mikal Bridges will never be a number one? He cannot break down a defense. Trade him for Kuminga or Josh Giddey. Okay, so I agree with everything up until the last sentence. I would not trade him for these other two guys, but I will say that, and I don't know if we ever, I don't think I ever thought this. Maybe you did. Was that I never really thought that Mikal was like a number one kind of guy. I thought it was like best version of him could be like a skinnier Paul George, but I don't even think that like that is. I always thought like we probably saw sort of like what close to the peak was last year, right? And there was probably like a little bit more that could come, possibly, but I didn't think it was gonna be like okay. Let me put it this way: I never thought he would get like top 20. I never thought he would like bust into the top 20 of the NBA in terms of players. I don't think. And so I think if you're saying that as like a number one, that's probably correct. And I don't know if some people had done that math. Clearly, there was like, he's not lived up to what the sort of like baseline expectations were, which could be like, hey, you're headed to an all-star game. You are in that discussion for maybe all NBA, but probably not. Right. I mean, he's really far away from that right now. And so I think that like that is fair. Would I trade him for these other two guys? Not even close. But I do think, and by the way, there's a huge gap between not a number one in the NBA and trade you for Jonathan Kuminga. Right. Like, and so like I think we can agree that there's a pretty large gap between those two ideas. So
I'll push back on that a little bit, Doug. I think that actually his number one option is he is a number one, and then the number two decision is trading him for Josh Giddey. That's apples to apples. I'm not even knocking, by the way, Your Highness, because I do agree with the first two parts. And to your point, when we talked about like, I think. Did I think about him being like he could be the number one for the Nets as currently constituted? Yes, right? Like that's what we talked about last year. Can he be a 23 to 25 point scorer? Yes, he can be that guy. And even the second part of this, he can't break down a defense. I agree with you that, but again, I never found myself last year saying, and this is a guy that you get him in ISO and he takes dudes one-on-one off the dribble. It was just a guy that was very comfortable getting to his spots and finding his pockets.
Yeah.
This is actually where the emergence of Cam Thomas becomes kind of critical for what they can do this season and what Mikal Bridges can become. So on the whole, yes, I agree that he's never going to be a pure number one by NBA standards. That doesn't have to be a bad thing, but the start of this season has looked a little bit underwhelming relative even to what our expectations were, right?
I would go even one further. It's a lot of it underwhelming. Like based on the expectations, it's just been, hashtag bad up until now. I think not every game, but in the aggregate here, it's just not. And now part of that is expectations. Like the expectations raise, so then all of a sudden, these 23, even the 23-point games like tonight, where he's moderately efficient. Well, I guess he's really not efficient at 650. But like even these games just go ring in as like pretty huge disappointments, right? Because your expectation level has raised, because we're looking at the end of last season. If you go back through sort of like how he finished off, he was playing insane minutes to start, but he was also just, 20 shots a game, 7 threes a game, dropping, 26, 24, 30, 42, 27, 44, 27, 32. I mean, this is like the end of the season run that he had in the regular season. And we're just really, really far away from that right now. And
by the way,
that's what screws you up.
I'll tie it into as we get to H2 Cades, or on the Cam Johnson question, not dissimilar to when we talked about, remember last year, the Nets were under 500 in those 27 games, right? So the same way that people would talk about, Cam Thomas, and can he be a guy that scores a lot of points and also helps the team win basketball games? You go back to last year. Now that starting unit, which started tonight's game, they had a positive net rating together. I put it up before this one, 115, 109 roughly offensive, defensively. So there was a good combination. But the Nets were under 500 to close out the season. So sometimes, hey, all the volume and the scoring, that's great. And I think actually I'll add in on Mikal. I think the other part of it for me is too, I have not over the course of the game, and defense is the harder thing to watch and identify who's doing it well and who's being successful. But I have not over the course of these first 12 games also found myself saying, oof, Mikal just put the clamps on him there. There have not been those moments or those possessions, which is a big part of what, what we believe him to be. High level defensive player, and then can certainly be a 20-point scorer offensively. That balance hasn't been there either.
He's not always getting the tougher assignments like tonight. I mean, he's not going to guard Butler here in this game, and he doesn't. When Simmons is around, he was not even getting Simmons was actually taking usually the toughest assignments. When they played the Clippers, Mikal did get Harden, but that team looks like it totally stinks. So I'm not even sure that's a good litmus test. I don't
root for negative things, but I'm not totally dissatisfied about what's going on with Harden now, the Clippers.
I save it for the times where it really matters.
Where it really
this
counts.
one, it really matters. And I'm really rooting against that situation. I want that. Yeah, that one deserves all the bad vibes as far as I'm concerned, but I save him. I'm a pretty positive guy when it comes to this stuff. But sometimes you got to fire the bullet. Okay, let's hit it
on this question here about Cam Johnson. And the reason why I pulled it up. No, it's just because this is, to me, that you can tie this directly to Mikal Bridges in a lot of ways. You can make the case that Cameron Johnson, for what he is as a player, can model and fit in a lot of different scenarios. If the Mikal Bridges version doesn't become X and these contracts and how long they go, like I'll reference the Howard Beck conversation that I had going back into the offseason when I talked about these things. Oh, what do you do with Mikal? What do you do with Cameron Johnson when the contract potential is coming up? Howard Beck said it, and I think he was correct, and it'll play itself out this way. He goes, yeah, of course you bring back Cameron Johnson because you can always trade him. You can always trade Mikal. Like you're always going to be able to make a different decision later. So you go with this vibe and this energy now. That would be, to me, these guys are connected because how the team plays and how they play is going to dictate what happens with these guys.
Yeah, for sure. And look, it's sometimes the worst time. It's always the worst time to do full-on team evaluations after a loss. It's like literally, It's also the second worst time to just do it after a win. So those are like the two worst times. Or maybe
10-year contracts, trade them now.
The two very worst times in sports is to do long-term evaluations of players after a game because it's just too fresh in your mind. Like it's too close. You're thinking too much about the last shot you saw them take, and it's really hard. That being said, I think if we looked at the full body of work for the season for Mikal, it's like not been there. It has not really actually very little to do with this game.
Yeah.
It's been what we've basically seen from the beginning with Cam Johnson. I'll give again. I'm gonna give a little bit of a pass here because I guess this is his third game back. Not his fourth game back. Jeez, I thought it was only his third.
Well, the fouls were the problem because then he hit some threes when he finally got back in there. But this, this falls into the this just falls in the category of like, okay, knock off the rust, like you say, knock off the rust. 1 game, 2 games. Now let's dial it up here. Like we talk about you being a 20-point scorer with consistency night over night as well.
Yeah. So the problem with him, and this is like something we talked about with Cam Johnson, something we talked about in the offseason, and we can get to this, Spencer, is that for his game to sort of like go to the next level, he needed to be more than just a 3-point shooter, right? He needed to get to the rim a little bit more. He needed to probably get into the mid range a little bit more. And we're really like not seeing that shot distribution really happen. Let me just look real quick. So
because I'm actually going to push while you're pulling that up. I'll just push on.
So 62% of his shot attempts are threes so far this season. Yeah. And that is an overwhelming majority when it just comes to shooting. So if you're taking like 63% of your shots and you're getting to the line 2 times a game through your first 4 games.
Yeah.
It's just like not good enough for the money. And I know like the contract is like not as much as it was originally reported because they knocked it off and there were some incentives in there. And it's like, I think it ends up being like 18 million or something. So it's like not this crazy overwhelming contract, but like from that standpoint, there's been even through 4 games, he's just a spot up shooter. Like he's a stretch 3 and that's, and a small 4. Like that's kind of it. And there's really, so far, we have not seen those other parts of the game really materialize.
Yeah, and if again, a game like tonight, I said plus 18 earlier, 5 fouls tonight. Now he goes 5 of 10 from the field, 3 of 6 from deep, gets to the line 3 times, knocks him down, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, right? Like if he plays 34 minutes in this game, that stat line might be the first glimmer of that. But to your point, we talk about the perimeter shooting, we talk about Coach Vaughn. I want to see just Cameron Johnson raining them down. On the one hand, his volume, his percentage tells you, yeah, that's a good fundamental idea, but not to what you and I talked about with who Cameron Johnson needs to be. It was all the next level stuff of his game that we want to see develop here. So I'll give him a little bit of a longer runway here because he had the little injury to start the season. Yeah. Unlike Mikal, who we're seeing and wondering, what is this going to look like ultimately? From Tamro, the two, just very quickly on the Spencer Dinwiddie stuff, the Chucks with less than 30 seconds. So maybe going for a 2-for-1. Yeah, I can live with those, but he had like 5 of them in this game. There was more. It was more than just these 2. There was just a couple of sequences where, and by the way, he also had the tap out one where he scuttled himself back behind the 3-point line and knocked down the triple. Like, so you do have to live with the misses, but there were, as Doug talks about, when they're wide open looks, you live with the misses. When they are congested, when there's a second defender coming over, you have to at some point acknowledge that you are dramatically decreasing the value of 3 points versus 2 points in some of those looks. I just wanted to get that one out of the way somewhat quickly. Let's go to firing it off here with, Jean Remy, frequent flyer. Although we have Ben, the Nets still need a ball handler doing late game who's comfortable at making plays. Yeah. I mean, that's
they don't have a playmaker. They don't have any playmakers on this offense. Really, they have
one of the best playmakers, right? Like
he probably just is.
Honestly, and then Cam Thomas when healthy, yeah, obviously when Cam Thomas is out there. But this is the point about, we praise Nick Claxton tonight and we praise Ben Simmons when he's playing and he looks good. But when you praise both of them, you also give the other side. Well, the problem is Ben Simmons doesn't attack at the basket and go to the free throw line or have an offensive game. The problem for Claxton is offensive related, but in a different way, right? So that's of course that's a part of it. It's why inside of what feels like a very positive start to this season, you still have all these little breadcrumbs of, is this going to work out? Is this ultimately going to be something that's sustainable for the team?
I mean, I wonder too, like there's actually, I'm going to bring up this one question. It came on here late, but I'll throw this one. It says, I think Mikal and Johnson are going to thrive if we can ever get a big superstar back on the roster. So this is interesting because really these two guys are sort of like mix and match peaches. They're just right. They're like high level, ultra support guys, right? And Mikal's more than that for sure. So I don't really want to undersell it, but they can play basically in any system. Every team needs guys like this, like, 3-and-D wings that are just more than that. Like they're more than just these regular wings. And you could theoretically kind of bring in any superstar literally name anybody that's a superstar, and it would work with these two guys because that's just how flexible and just malleable their game is, right? Their game mixes and matches with literally anybody. And so I wonder part of this is it's like a kick the can down the road to like 25, 26 when you still have another year of Cam and you're coming up with one more year left on McHale and you're off Simmons at that point. And it's like the only two guys in the contract are $25 million a year Mikal Bridges, which is like one of the very, very best contracts in basketball. $22 million Cam Johnson, which with the cap spikes you can totally live with. Literally nobody else except for like maybe Claxton at that point is
and Thomas if they go ahead
and Cam and guy, you've made decisions on these other guys, right? But I do because those contracts are McHale's for sure is great. Like it's like his contract's so good. It's like not exactly the same. It's not a rookie contract, but it's like, oh, when you just like luck into like some quarterback on a rookie scale contract and you can just like do other stuff because like that guy's making so little. Like that's really how little he makes for his skill level. So
Sam Howell making $2.9 million for the Washington Commanders as a 5th-round quarterback that's leading the league.
Or just like even like Jalen Hurts, right? Or Jalen Hurts with the Eagles or Mahomes.
I don't talk about a team that I feel like is better than the Giants.
Whatever. But like point being, when you have these guys on just super, super great money, you can just do so much more. So I wonder if like they don't have their draft picks for the next 2 years, just kind of tread water and then have these two guys be on the roster when you pair it up with just like, insert whoever is unhappy at that point. Right. That's a reasonable timeline, I think.
Yeah. And by the way, the Johnson contract to flesh it out, 24 and a half, 22 and a half, 20 and a half, and 25, 26, and then 22.5 with some likely and unlikely incentives, as you mentioned. So those are going to be very movable, potentially very movable contracts. And you can make, and by the way, that's why
I don't even think what I'm saying is I don't even think you need to move them though. I think they just like you
just keep them around and you just,
if they were your second and third or fourth best player, then like you're looking really, really good. You're looking great. And I'm saying their contracts line up with being able to bring in somebody else. And now it's like, I'm just going to say a name. Like say you brought in, anybody, Embiid or
people mention Karl Anthony Towns, right, with his massive contract. Like, let's just say, right, in a world you bring him in,
or just whatever superstar at that point is unhappy. It's a long time from now. This happens once a year where someone gets pissed off.
Do you think in 25, 26, do you think there'll be unhappy superstars in the NBA? Will that be kind of like, like they didn't used to have the 3-point shot, now they do. There used to be unhappy superstars, but now they're all good.
Now they'll be super psyched. One thing that's happening this year, I will say, is these guys are all playing. We've kind of joked about that at the beginning of the year. Like Embiid played a back-to-back the other day. These guys, they're playing the games. Good for them. Congrats.
Hate to break the news to you too. Like for the most part, the in-season tournament, like teams and players are buying into that as well. Like
for now.
I know. We're going to run up against some of those tank games in the back end of it, but hopefully it still ends up having some value throughout the whole group stage. Very quickly here, Jared Williams, by the way, frequent flyer with us as well. Trade Sharp for a Brooklyn pizza. I like Day'Ron Sharp. Well, I was just talking about this. He's not perfect, and he's not, there's plenty more he needs to do. But we talked about this, I think, on the post-game live last time. He's taking little incremental steps forward. I'm fine with him. He's a bench guy. He's going to play 10 to 15 minutes. He had a couple of back-to-back possessions late in this game where he had a little turnaround face up at the basket and got a shot to go. He came back with an ugly one that 2 possessions later. That's fine. I'm not even going to, again, we often talk about this. Judge a player based on expectation that you have for him, right? Like Day'Ron Sharp is doing and exceeding what I want for him to do, given what I expected for him coming in. Can you
Let me just get to this one real quick here. Yeah. Can't get a high-level superstar, but what about Levine and Simmons for picks? Or sorry, for Ben Simmons and picks? As much as I think the Simmons contract stinks, I think Levine's contract arguably stinks more. And only because it goes out for longer. Yeah. It goes out for 2 years longer. And we talked about this a little bit on the bonus episode, so you can go back and check out our thoughts on this. It's on the podcast feed. But just to give cliff notes on this one, Levine, the Simmons contract is bad, but at least it ends. Like the Levine one doesn't end. And with Levine, unlike Simmons, who's like sort of a connector and like the defensive guy that we talked about, they could really need tonight, actually does the things that to some degree McHale and CJ don't do. Levine just does the things that these other guys do, which is shoot, never passes, like doesn't play defense. It would not be an elevator for this team. Like he would not elevate anybody. It'd be the end of Cam Thomas's development. Like it's just not the guy you want. It was not the guy you want to bring in. I get that like everyone wants a shiny new thing to come in the door. Levine is not the guy. It would not work for the guys they have. If you have Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey and some of these other guys, yeah, okay, go for it. But the Nets just don't have those guys. I would never do this.
And you wouldn't want to bring him in and then you'd be saying like he's our number one. That's not the guy that you want to be your number one. Represents about 30% of the league cap right now in his contract. And this is, I'll just hit this quickly. $40 million extends out to a player option in 26-27 of $49 million, which, as we say, he'll be picking that up, and he'll be 31 years old, which I'll reference back to when we had this one of the few beautiful moments on the podcast when Doug Norrie pops his top, and it was around the guy's only 29, going to be 30. He's just entering his prime. That is the end of the prime, and that is the entering what could be a brutal 31 years old making $49 million for Zach LaVine.
And by the way, this guy falls into the same category. What do you think about Pascal Siakam? The Raptors haven't offered him a new contract. News they don't plan on doing so. He's gonna be 30. He's gonna be 30 by the time before this season ends. This is another example of a guy you cannot do this with, at least with the Nets. Like, you can't do this with. He's not going to elevate enough guys. Like, if you put him on, let me think of a team real quick. So if you put him on the Pacers, okay, like let's say the Pacers are like, hey, we're better than we thought we were going to be. We're like, we can live with the money. He's kind of a really pretty good match with Miles and Tyrese. Like that can make sense. Because you're like, we got the cash to spare and whatever. But like the Nets just aren't that team. And you don't want to have, I guarantee what you don't want is a 34-year-old Pascal Siakam like still sitting on your books. And that is what you would have with like a 3 or 4 year contract. So this is just another guy that I just don't think fits what the Nets are trying to do.
Live in La La Land with me here for a second on Pascal Siakam, because he's in the final year of his contract, making $37.8 million. Same exact thing. LaVine and picks for Ben Simmons. Would you go the step of what does it take to send you Ben Simmons, take back Siakam just for the rest of this? We'll take him for this year, and then we're all done. He goes off the books after the season. Ben Simmons is now gone. That, like, if you talk about functionally, like that would be something that I would reasonably explore. Not extending Pascal Siakam, but I'll flip it where I just take $40 million off my cap at the end of this season and be done with that concern.
I'm never entertaining any Simmons trades. No one's trading for Ben Simmons. Like, there's just not. It's not. No. It's not realistic.
Go to La La Land, Doug, and then answer the question. Yeah.
Oh, now you're okay. Well, maybe in La La Land, like Ben Simmons can just ship me his contract, and I don't have to do the podcast anymore. Like, so.
There we go. Let's be solutions oriented, Doug. That's what I'm saying.
If we're just going to believe me, if we're going to La La Land, I'm gonna go to a much better place than like thinking about Ben Simmons. Yeah. I'll come up with more creative things than what Ben Simmons trades.
What the Nets do.
Believe me, I'm not the most creative guy in the world, but I can get more creative in this utopia than just like figuring out ways to trade Ben Simmons.
By the way, I'm in La La Land. The Dallas Mavericks just traded Luka for Ben Simmons straight up. It was pretty sweet.
They're never trading him. They'll never trading him, and you cannot trade him. The reason you want to trade him is because he's a huge, massive liability, and the contract's terrible. And believe me, GMs get that. Like that, no one is trading for this guy.
You think
I'm just positive. I can't even entertain it. I don't even know. Sorry to just
it has to be a bad contract for a bad contract, and at the scale, it
has to be even a worse contract.
Getting older, it has to be.
It has to literally be even worse because of the other stuff that comes along with Simmons. Like, it's one thing to be a bad contract. Like, Kevin Love was kind of a bad contract for Cleveland forever, and they couldn't trade him.
Right.
You couldn't trade him then. Simmons, it's like a bad contract, and you get the baggage of like not knowing what's going on or if he's going to play or whatever. So it's not even just a bad contract. It's more than that. So it's just, they're never trading him.
Can you guys prudently discuss what players you would like to see in Brooklyn? I mean, just good players, better players, star players. I will say, I brought this up just to let Brian know that I think like at some point, we've been doing a lot more bonus episodes on the podcast feed where it kind of gets a little more high level than game to game and in this season. I think the idea of it's like keeping the powder fresh, right, and the assets dry for that superstar. We've had these discussions before about like, well, what about Joel Embiid? Now 76ers have turned things around after dumping Harden to the Clippers. But it was like, what about Embiid? When we talked about that in the moment, I was like, 31, Embiid getting older, like for right now in this very second, would I take him? Of course. But you talk about longer contracts, like the list gets shorter and shorter when you think about superstar talents that will get upset or disappointed in their current situation. I think the bigger discussion for me would be like, do you want the Nets to use all these assets to go get the star? Or do you want him to take that kind of lottery risk of firing bullets in the draft and trying to OKC your way to a successful roster? Because there's no guarantees. I don't know. Every star at some point says they're done with wherever they are. So it's just like an inevitable cycle.
You can't win without the best guys. You can't win at the highest level without the best guys. And you need to, in my mind, always be moving the deck chairs around or the chess pieces around in thinking about ways to get those best guys. Like, that's just my personal philosophy, because I think that's the ultimate goal. And I get that not everyone subscribes to that goal, because to get through that goal can be hard at times, which can mean tanking. It can mean, uncomfortable trades. It can mean sort of trading away guys that you like, right? It just means things that can always not feel good as a fan to go through. The Nets did this once, and the other problem is the Nets did this once, and it flamed out in pretty spectacular fashion. It was all correct. It was all correct. Every move that they made pretty much during that time was the right move to do. It didn't work. It came very close. It just didn't work. As far as I'm concerned, this is why I was like, trade Claxton, like trade Dorian Finney-Smith, like just try to get as many pieces as you can for a superstar, and signing guys to long-term deals at like medium money, or trading draft picks to bring in Royce O'Neal's of the world. Like, I mean, that was a little different, but like those just aren't big moves. Like, does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, no, of course. Yeah. And the only spot where this is where the Dorian Finney-Smith piece, even when I said, hey, he's playing so well, how could you possibly? Ultimately, push comes to shove, you trade him. He's 30 years old, the value, everything, right? Royce O'Neal, Spencer Dinwiddie, everybody that's in that age range, they go. We divide a little bit on the Claxton piece just because with his age,
maybe he's a bad example.
I know,
maybe that's a bad example.
Yeah. But like when these things come up, right, you always at least explore it. I fundamentally agree with that. And I think philosophically what we end up asking ourselves is, listen, the goal is to win a championship, make no bones about it. But the paths to get there are tricky and the opportunities are finite. And I do sometimes wonder about saying, well, you know what we want to be? We don't want to be where we are right now, which is, hey, we can make the playoffs. Maybe we were a little bit better this year than we thought we could have been, 6 seed, whatever. Yeah. We want to be a team that gets mentioned in the top 4 of the Eastern Conference. Now, most of those teams have a star, right? And maybe you got to get there through the draft to one of them. Maybe Cam Thomas ends up being a low-level version of that. If you can live in that range, I can do that for 4 or 5 seasons and love and be excited and see if you can win those matchups and try to find that piece to add, as opposed to the ramp up, the big swings, and then the potential letdown. Now, again, the recent history is a part of what's informing it, right? Because I just saw it not work out at a global level, and now the Nets don't have their own assets to be able to say, we control our own destiny, right? Now you're scrambling, which I think compounds the necessity to say, well, we got to go for a star. Why? Because we don't have our own picks, so we can't control our own fate, so we have to do it outside rather than inside.
Yeah, the Nets are in a bad spot with this. We talked about this many times. They're in a bad spot for controlling their own fate because of the Houston picks, and this team would look so much different if they had these 2 Houston picks. Believe me, they'd be in last place right now. I would guarantee it. There would be no doubt in my mind that this team would be fully wizarding this thing all over the place.
Mikal Bridges would have been passed through, traded when they made the Kevin Durant deal, and Cameron
probably
Johnson wouldn't have been. He would have been traded as well, and certainly
or traded this year. Or traded, or already thinking about where he's going to get traded this year. Yep. And Cam Johnson never resigned. Or maybe he's got to get to the salary floor, but they would be in full on loss mode. They can't, because doesn't do them any good. But I brought up this thing is because these are the examples of where you don't want to be. Now, the Raptors did win the title. Masai took the risk, and it worked, and he got Kawhi, and he just spiked a Kawhi plus a Clay Durant Achilles and a Clay ACL and a bounced ball off the side of the rim that went in. Like he
read the tea leaves well that year.
He was good, and he was incredibly lucky, and they won. So it's hard to put the Raptors fully into that group, except for after that they've done all these sort of medium to no swing moves, and now they're just in this weird spot, right?
Yeah.
The Bulls are the worst version of this, which is made a kind of mini all-in move for Vooch, the worst kind of guy to do that for, and then just sort of hang Levine and DDR around for a long time and kind of just be an expensive-ish 39-win team.
Yeah.
With nobody good. It's like they don't even have anyone. They don't even have anyone young and good. So it's like that's worst of all worlds, and that's definitely where you don't want to be.
Well, and by the way, and I'll tack onto this. I'm not saying this for me personally or convictions or this or that, because again, I want the team to be good and productive and try to win games, and that matters to the organization as well. Raptors and Bulls should have blown it up last trade deadline. Now, the Nets aren't in that same situation based on the ages of Cameron Johnson and Mikal Bridges. You mentioned it before. You get another season later and another season out. Like trade deadlines are going to be conversations. In the same way that we were frustrated a year ago with Seth Curry, Doug and I will. And I push back a little bit, but ultimately, if I come out of this trade deadline and Dorian Finney-Smith is still on this roster, it's a problem. If Royce O'Neal is still on this roster, it's a problem. There's a world where Spencer Dinwiddie is on this roster. It's a problem. It costs you in the win columns this year, but it'll cost you even more if you go to the playoffs and win one game versus getting more assets and having more opportunities to facilitate a younger rebuild. So it's gonna be a big part of what we talk about.
You did this one for
This is a good one, I thought. Yeah.
So rebounding was weakness last year. It's like, they were like top. Well, I think they were second in rebounding coming into this game, and just rebounds per game. Rebounding percentage was a little lower. And then they were a little bit better on defensive rebounding, a little worse offensive rebounding, but they were still like I think they were second and maybe no worse fourth. I actually think if you look at this team, it's actually hard to find a place that they are weak in, except for what Adam said at the beginning. And maybe we just tie it to the end of this and get out of here with this, but is that when you look at this team, they just don't have tons of talent. Like they have lots of good players. They have a decent amount of good players.
Yep.
They have no great players. And they might not even have a player that's like the next level below great or something like that, right? Whatever those tiers are, whatever that tier system of NBA talent is, they definitely do not have anyone in the top tier for sure. And I'll say top tier, top 20 plus players. Well, depending on where you think Mikal is, they might not have anyone in the top 30. And maybe that's being too harsh. But at some point, just because of the way the minutes are dispersed in basketball, and you can only play 5 guys at once, and some teams can just play all their guys the minutes if they want to. Like Jimmy can go out there and play 37 minutes, and he's going to be the best player. If you don't have the high-end talent, you can only win on the margins so long. I actually think the Nets have been winning on the margins here because the other guys have been so good. Lonnie, DSJ has gotten really great defensive minutes out of him, right? Like Trendon Watford's come in and played nice minutes. Dayron's played above his head.
Armani Brooks walks in for one game and gives you a performance from the outside. Like it's when you need
a couple good shooting games from Royce, right? Like they've won some margin stuff because they have a good deep roster, but their biggest weakness by far is they just don't have enough talent. And that's the hardest problem in basketball to solve.
I'll tie it back to Chicago. They're not a 39-ish win team. They can be above 500, but they're not. But playoff basketball, it'll print all the same problems because then the 5 best players play the most minutes.
Of course.
And 5 best against 5 best. The Nets are always going to be.
Oh, it's like, we get to play Tyrese Maxey 44 minutes and Embiid 40 minutes. Okay, the game's over. It's like that's just kind of the story.
Handshake agreement. You guys are gonna play the bench, right? You're gonna because we got. And if you don't let us, then how are we gonna? So yeah, and then that's. I think it gets into a little bit of a negative space here as we'll close this one out. Just around like there is a reality to what the ceiling of this team is right now. And
I don't think it's negative. I think it's just expectation setting. Like it's just
that's
like, hey,
right.
Like
yes.
It's not negative. We knew this. This is actually not new.
Right.
In a lot of ways, this season's been overwhelmingly positive as far as I'm concerned in terms of the win losses. It's just that like you have to just reset your expectations. It's like, what are the weaknesses? Sometimes the weaknesses are just those other teams have awesome guys. There's only so many of those dudes, and the Nets don't have any of those guys. That's it. And that's kind of the end. Oh, there you go.
That's all you need to know, man. You were up here a couple times, Mirror Slayer. Really appreciate you. And it's going to be fun to see how this unfolds. I ultimately do want to see a healthy version of this team. I'd like to see everybody playing. I'd like to officially confirm or deny the Ben Simmons, Nicholas Claxton rotation functionality, all that good stuff. I want to see if Cam Thomas can give you 15 more games of being a 20-point scorer with, plus scorer with consistency. So that's the next step for this team. Be healthy so that we can see what the version of this roster is and maybe where you can find your place to have some success moving some pieces as we work our way along.
Oh, buddy, like we said today, No Nets added to the injury report today. No one removed. No one removed from the injury report.
Nobody added.
But nobody added. We're going to get out of here. Much appreciated everyone that was in YouTube live here. Love chopping it up here. Just gets a little late in the night. That's the only reason. The eyes get a little heavy after just,
What's your
5
turn?
hours of basketball.
Getting a little punchy.
Getting a little punchy. All right. Much appreciate everyone in here. Make sure you join subtext.com. Make sure you /Locked-On-Nets. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to the podcast. Make sure you hit subscribe over here on YouTube if you're in the chat. Shame on you if you have not done it already, but we're going to let you off the hook if you do it right now. Go subscribe to the Locked-On-Nets YouTube channel. We'll be back again next week on Monday talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball, 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 yeah.